In the natural development of the human mind, belief is not the result of rational proof, but arises spontaneously and independently, shaped much more by emotions than by reason. Immature intelligence believes first and only seeks proof later, if encouraged to do so. In ancient Greece, the oracle at Delphi proclaimed Socrates the wisest of men. Socrates, far from interpreting this as a celebration of his knowledge, understood it as divine approval of his awareness of his own ignorance, a perception so rare that it could, paradoxically, be seen as the greatest of wisdoms. "I know that I know nothing," he said, embarking on an investigation that would not end in definitive answers, but in the construction of an attitude of questioning in the face of life. Driven by respect for the gods and the need to understand the truth behind that message, Socrates began to question those who were considered wise. He discovered, however, that many believed they knew what they did not really understand. He realized that he was wiser, precisely because he did not pretend to have certainties where there were only assumptions. His dialogues, immortalized by Plato, gave rise to what we call the Socratic method, a style of investigative conversation in which well-formulated questions expose the hidden flaws in human certainties and reveal the fragility of unexamined beliefs. The Socratic method is more than a system of debate. It is a way of life that requires patience, humility, and intellectual courage. Plato, in recording Socrates' practice, sought to combat arrogant ignorance. The common impulse to accept traditional feelings, customs, and opinions as absolute truths without any critical analysis. John Stuart Mill observed that Plato's main target was this tendency to confuse desires, disapprovals, and passing emotions with universal principles, as if these feelings did not require examination or justification. Socrates knew that every concept needs to be questioned. He often used contrast with the opposite to reveal the fragility of definitions accepted without reflection. As Ward Farnsworth, author of The Socratic Method, reminds us, if we had to point to an opposite of the Socratic spirit today, we would find it in the culture of emotional impulsivity on social media, partisan fanaticism, manufactured certainties, shaming of those who question, censorship of dissenting opinions, and the inability to sustain civilized dialogue between those who disagree. The rise of this culture of instant reaction and celebration of ignorance should alarm us. The Socratic method offers the remedy, the courage to ask uncomfortable questions, the humility to recognize our limitations, and the determination to resist the seductions of easy certainty. In a world that rewards hasty answers and unquestionable opinions, keeping the Socratic tradition alive is more than a philosophical practice. It is an essential act of survival for reason and freedom of spirit. In other words, the Socratic method is the opposite of everything that is encouraged today on social media, and that, little by little, contaminates political, cultural, and personal life. It means cultivating the courage to ask difficult questions and to receive intellectual challenges, not as attacks, but as acts of true friendship. It is about seeing disagreement as a gift and not as an offense. Unfortunately, the current public environment seems increasingly incapable of harboring this spirit. Political discourse has become a polarized battlefield unlike anything seen since the darkest days of modern history. Instead of facilitating sincere exchange, communication technologies have created arenas where snap judgments and emotionally charged reactions are not only expected, but rewarded with virtual applause. The mind fed by these sources learns to survive on emotional crumbs, sound bites, instant certainties, indignant fury. Each like reinforces the impulse to react, not to reflect. Contradiction is seen as a personal attack, and doubt becomes an intolerable threat. In this scenario, attention spans shrink, rational discourse withers, and superficiality is not only normalized, but celebrated as a virtue. The Socratic method then emerges as an oasis in the desert of mental haste, a call to rescue the ability to think clearly, patiently, and honestly. Practicing the Socratic method is not just about seeking better conversations with others. It is first and foremost an exercise in radical honesty with oneself. Those who live in the Socratic manner embody the commandment inscribed in the temple of Apollo: know thyself. Socrates took this principle to the extreme, understanding that to live without examining one's own life was to waste the most precious gift of conscious existence. In 399 BC, when tried on charges of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods, Socrates, in Plato's Apology, defended himself by stating that an unexamined life is not worth living. This was not intellectual elitism, but a universal call to inner responsibility. Ridicule, for Socrates, is the specific form of vice that arises when we give up the search for truth in the name of emotional comfort. To investigate means, above all, to recognize the fragility of our beliefs. The Socratic practice begins with a question directed at a seemingly simple statement. The aim is not only to understand what is said, but to unearth the invisible assumptions that underlie those words. By following this thread, we often discover that what we believe clashes with other beliefs that we also consider essential, revealing contradictions that challenge our image of ourselves. A clear example of this can be found in the dialogue Laches, where Socrates questions two Athenian generals about the true nature of courage. When one of them defines courage as a type of wisdom, Socrates patiently explores the implications of this definition. If courage is knowing what is fearful, then animals would not be courageous, as they lack rational understanding. Thus, the conversation reveals that the initial definition is insufficient, forcing a deeper reflection on what seems so clear at first glance. But even this new definition of courage does not satisfy Socrates. If courage were only the knowledge of what we should fear, then fearless animals could not be considered courageous, as they lack the capacity for reasoning. Being fearless, alone, is not being courageous. Courage requires more than the absence of fear. It requires a conscious understanding of what one faces. Socrates, dissatisfied, delves even deeper into the investigation. He asks whether courage is just one of many virtues, distinct from justice, temperance, and wisdom. Nietzsche, one of the generals, agrees. However, when pressed, their definitions begin to become entangled in contradictions. If courage is the knowledge of what is fearful and desirable, then it also implies knowledge of what is good and evil in itself. And if someone possesses such knowledge, they would inevitably possess all other virtues. Therefore, courage would not be a part, but the totality of virtue, a conclusion that conflicts with the initial assertion that courage is only one of many virtues. This internal tension is at the heart of the Socratic method. By taking a statement to its logical limit, Socrates shows that many of our beliefs, when examined rigorously, collapse on themselves. Ward Farnsworth describes the technique simply: when someone makes a statement about right and wrong, about what is good or bad, it is necessary to question it, ask for precise definitions, seek consistency, and, upon finding tension between the stated beliefs, reveal that there is something not yet understood. Socratic denial, when done masterfully, does not seem like an attack. It invites the interlocutor to think better, to refine their ideas. It is a duel without swords, where victory belongs not to the one who defeats the other, but to the one who manages to abandon a fragile belief in favor of something truer. This same spirit can and should be applied to ourselves. Questioning our own beliefs is as important as, if not more important than, questioning those of others. The Socratic method teaches us that a healthy mind is not one filled with certainties, but one that is capable of enduring doubt, that welcomes the discomfort of not having easy answers. The dissatisfaction we feel when we perceive contradictions in our thoughts is not a defect. It is a symptom of growth. The desire to remain comfortable in our opinions is the real trap. The tranquility of unquestioned convictions may seem tempting, but it is an illusory rest, a sleep of reason that, as Goya warned, breeds monsters. The Socratic path, on the contrary, seeks another kind of comfort, that of living in the light of uncertainty, of not clinging to any belief without first testing it, examining it, exposing it to the slow fire of doubt. In this process, beliefs cease to be emotional prisons and become bridges to new territories of thought. Those who follow this path learn to value intellectual honesty more than victory in debates. They learn that living without investigating is, in essence, merely surviving mechanically, while truly living is remaining awake, attentive, and humble in the face of the mystery of existence. Often, people defend ideas that, if they reflected on them more carefully, they would realize they do not truly believe. The Socratic method is not only an antidote to the collapse of rational discourse, it is also a path to a more wholesome inner life. For Socrates, ideas were as important as, or even more important than, what we can see and touch. He sought to awaken in others the awareness that the soul needed to be cultivated with the same zeal that is devoted to the body or appearance. Caring for the soul, however, has never been a priority for most people. We live in a culture that encourages quick reactions, not deep reflection. Formal education often teaches what to think, but rarely teaches how to think. Society, driven by haste and anxiety, clamors for immediate answers and superficial positions, but distrusts those who pause to examine their own certainties. For Socrates, there was no greater tragedy than self-deception. Deceiving oneself is more destructive than being deceived by others, because the deceiver lives within us and accompanies us in silence, undermining our inner freedom. To begin a Socratic investigation, one must ask open-ended questions, seek the reasons behind each answer, and, above all, maintain the courage to investigate to the bitter end. It is not enough to accept a convenient explanation. Each conclusion must be tested from multiple angles, like an object examined under different lights. Consistency is no guarantee of truth, but it is an indication of sound thinking. True awakening requires something more difficult, discovering the hidden beliefs that underpin our opinions, the invisible assumptions that shape our judgments. Many of these beliefs are unconsciously inherited from culture, family, or past experiences, and we carry these ideas as obvious truths without ever having examined them. Those who do not know where their convictions come from are like someone who builds a house on foundations they have never seen. When arguments arise, the sides often clash without realizing that they are speaking from completely different premises that have never been tested. Understanding the concepts behind our opinions is essential because our actions and judgments derive from them. We often fight and suffer for ideas we barely understand. To say you believe something without investigating its deeper implications is to embrace a comfortable illusion. A clear example of this is the confusion between religious identity and belief systems. Calling oneself a Christian, for example, is not just professing a faith. It implies accepting a worldview, a complete cosmology. Many call themselves atheists, but continue to hold essentially Christian values and principles, such as belief in an objective and universal morality. Nietzsche was one of the first to point out this inconsistency. For him, the death of God should also mean the death of the absolute values upheld by that God. To reject divine existence, but keep intact the morality that originates from it, is an error of logic and intellectual honesty. Christianity, in its essence, is an integrated system. One cannot reject one part without questioning the whole. The real challenge is not just to abandon explicit beliefs, but to track down and examine those that survive in a latent form, silently shaping our choices and our worldview. Christianity, as Socrates would have been keen to point out, is not a set of loose doctrines that can be partially adopted or rejected. It stands or falls in its entirety with belief in the existence of God. To be truly atheist, therefore, requires more than denying the existence of a deity. It requires understanding and deconstructing the ethical, metaphysical, and existential implications that underpin the Christian worldview. Many of Plato's dialogues end without a satisfactory definition because Socrates refuses to accept hasty conclusions. The most important lesson Plato wanted to convey was precisely this: that we must resist the temptation of easy answers, keep an open mind, and cultivate humility in the face of the complexity of reality. Being Socratic does not mean following a doctrine, but adopting an attitude toward life. It means carrying within oneself a vigilant awareness that distrusts one's own certainties. This radical humility, however, is often confused with arrogance, because challenging established ideas inevitably implies contradicting the vanity of others and our own. Nietzsche called this inner strength intellectual conscience, not the courage to defend convictions, but the much rarer courage to attack them. Having faith in an opinion is easy. What is difficult is proving that we have the right to hold it. The Socratic method teaches that the search for truth is endless. Whenever we think we have reached solid ground, we realize that there are new layers of questioning to be explored. It is not a matter of replacing a wrong opinion with a right one, but of changing our relationship with opinions themselves, to stop loving them as emotional possessions and start loving them as working hypotheses, provisional and subject to constant revision. This is the true antidote to stupidity, the habit of testing, doubting, investigating. The modern passion for ready-made opinions is one of the most insidious forms of mental decay. Instead of seeking to understand, we seek to confirm. Instead of thinking, we react. The Socratic method is a practice of resistance against this impulse. It is choosing the more difficult path, that of uncertainty, openness, and vulnerability in the face of truth. Practicing the Socratic method is accepting that thinking honestly is often more uncomfortable than simply believing. Socrates understood that true intellectual freedom is not about achieving a perfect system of ideas, but about keeping alive the ability to question. In today's society, where the speed of information exceeds our capacity for reflection, this lesson is even more urgent. Resisting the comfort of unshakable certainties is preserving the dignity of human consciousness. That is why the Socratic method is not just an ancient philosophical technique. It is a vital necessity for anyone who wants to remain awake in a world that, every day, invites us to fall asleep in empty certainties. If someone shows you that your opinions contradict facts, you can still doubt the evidence. If they reveal that your thoughts do not align with new data, you can question the source. But when contradiction arises between your own beliefs, there is no escape. The discomfort is immediate, personal, inescapable. You cannot attack the messenger. It is in this terrain that Socrates saw the most precious opportunity for transformation. For him, internal contradiction was a form of moral disease, a sign that the soul needed purification. The most insidious type of ignorance, and perhaps the most prevalent today, is that which presents itself as certainty. David Dunning and Justin Kruger described this modern phenomenon, the bias in which less capable people overestimate their abilities, while the most competent doubt themselves. Socrates intuited this centuries ago, warning that no one could truly learn without first recognizing their own ignorance. The first step is not to accumulate information, but to purify the mind of arrogance and presumption. Just as a doctor knows that a sick body does not benefit from new food without first eliminating internal poisons, Socrates understood that the human spirit needed to be emptied of false certainties before it could welcome any real truth. We are often prisoners of our illusions of knowledge, and the more science and technology advance, the more we delude ourselves about how little we really understand. Paradoxically, accumulated knowledge becomes a new wall that prevents us from seeing beyond ready-made answers. Nietzsche warned that systems of thought, however brilliant, tend to imprison the minds of those who create them. When we believe we have found the definitive theory, that is precisely when we stop searching. Human beings oscillate between two impulses, the desire to know and the desire to believe. The first is difficult, requiring effort, openness, and constant revision. The second is easy, comfortable, and therefore seductive. Soren Kierkegaard, in The Sickness unto Death, lamented that in a world intoxicated with information, few realize that what is most lacking is precisely a new Socrates, someone who teaches us not to know more, but to question better. Illusion protects itself by avoiding the essential question. It is more comfortable to lose oneself in certainties than to face the void left by sincere doubts. If you believe that regaining the courage to question is vital in today's world, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and consider offering your support in any way you can. Your help strengthens this work and allows more content like this, which seeks to rekindle the flame of free thought, to reach more people. After all, as long as there are those who choose honest doubt over comfortable certainty, there will be hope that reason will continue to live on.